Boise State can pull this upset of Penn State, but they need more than just Ashton Jeanty to do it.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. So, Boise State is trying to make more magic happen in the Fiesta Bowl. My favorite game that I've ever watched as a non-rooting fan is Boise State, Oklahoma. There are a lot of great college football games and other sporting events in there, but that one's up there. So the magic of the Fiesta Bowl certainly makes you look at Boise State and say, well, I mean, they did it before. They were underdogs against Oklahoma. They could do it again. They can. But eventually, you have to move beyond the magic, the mystere, the allure of such stories, and understand a real football game is going to be played on the field. And Boise State is at a roster disadvantage here. Penn State has a better roster top to bottom. They're a better team top to bottom. Does not mean they're going to win the football game automatically. But what I am curious to see is how everybody around the Heisman Trophy runner-up is able to perform. Because if Jeanty gets to the second level, I don't care which conference you play in. He's hard to tackle. He is the best running back in college football. He might be the best one we've seen in the last several years, dating back to, I don't even know. Like, you could have a lot of comparisons there, and Jeanty is going to be very high on that list. But he alone can carry you to wins in the Mountain West. He alone cannot carry you against Penn State. Everybody's got to be clicking on all cylinders. And I'm about to be joined by Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions, and we're going to discuss this very thing because, remember, Boise State hung around with Oregon on the road. That's number one undefeated Oregon, who play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl on Wednesday this week. Can they do that again? Well, that's tricky.
Boise State played Oregon tough. That was a 3-point game. So if they made that one close, then the natural explanation is that Boise State's going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Penn State. I say not quite, but you remember that week 2 game pretty vividly, Spencer. Why was Boise State so close to Oregon in that game?
Well, they had a couple of really key moments in the second half where they forced Oregon turnovers to flip the momentum. You know, Boise State had the lead going into the half. They got Ashton Jeanty going in the early portion of that game. And then from there on out, they were exchanging blows, but it felt there was a moment in the third quarter where it felt like Oregon was going to go and pull away, and you go, oh, okay, now they're going to settle in. They had a 7-point lead. They had the ball. And then Oregon goes down the field, and Boise State's defense forces a turnover. And it wasn't anything in particular that was sloppy from the Ducks. It was just a good play by the Boise State defender. And then all of a sudden, they go down and score on the next play. And then Oregon has the ball. And then Oregon fumbles again, and Boise State scores a few plays later. And you look up, and Oregon fans are going, we went from 7-point lead with the ball to all of a sudden down 7 points. What's going on? And then the next sequence was Oregon taking a kickoff back to the house, which was actually dropped at the 1-yard line. Jayden Lamar picked up the ball, and he's an Oregon legend because of it. But that's kind of how the game progressed. There was certainly an opportunity for Oregon to open the game up more than it ended up being, which was a narrow 3-point win, but it didn't get there because Boise State's defense had a couple of really good moments. And I think they have to be more than just Ashton Jeanty to hang with Penn State. I mean, Jeanty, of course, has to have a good game. He's got to be able to run the football, get some explosive plays, and make it easier for the Broncos offense. But that's not really what I'm most interested to see, because I think, Zach, Boise State could have 200 yards from Ashton Jeanty on the ground, and they still lose the game by 10 to 14 points because Penn State is playing really good football right now. Saw that against SMU in the first playoff game. And in particular, yeah, we'll talk about the Boise State defense, but I'm looking at Maddux Madsen here because this is not somebody who folks outside the program expected to start coming into the year. He won the starting job against Malachi Nelson, who has since transferred out from the Broncos football program. He has shown why he won that particular job. But when he struggles, Boise State struggles. And they've only had the one loss this year to Oregon, but they've had close games. And those close games have arrived and have coincided with Madsen's lowest completion percentage games of the year, save for the Oregon State game, which was mildly competitive, but not intensely. So I think it's got all the potential to be a great matchup. But as I talked about last week on my show, Penn State deserves to be an 11.5-point favorite. That doesn't mean they're going to win the game by 30 points. But are they worthy of Vegas saying, hey, we see the possibility of Penn State opening this one up? I believe that answer is yes.
So long story short here, you and I agree in the fact that looking at this Fiesta Bowl game between Penn State and Boise State, that just because the Broncos played Oregon tough early in the season does not mean that it's deja vu all over again. This is a different Oregon team, as we've seen, a better one. Those first couple of weeks, they struggled. This is also a different Penn State team. I think Penn State's playing some of its best football. And I'm not saying that Boise State isn't. It's not that Boise State isn't playing it's had a little bit of a break, right? With the bye week and everything getting into the semifinal game. But I look at this Boise State team and I don't know that they've done anything they have a specific identity. That this is Ashton Jeanty's team. Maddux Madsen's a game manager. This is a defense that we don't ask it to do a whole lot in terms of because everything runs through Ashton Jeanty. So we'll talk about it more in the show with how Boise State is going to have to adapt if Ashton Jeanty is limited to some regard. But that's what I mean, is that this team hasn't gone through this transitory period where you see the beginning of it, because they struggled just with Wyoming a few weeks back, not too long ago. And I know that they're getting healthier at the right time, which is fitting going into the postseason. My point being is that I can see the difference between the first half of the season Penn State and the present Penn State. Same thing with Oregon. With Boise State, I don't see that. I see a team that still runs through its same identity with it's Ashton Jeanty or nothing.
I don't know that that's a bad thing necessarily.
I mean, if it's broke, don't fix it. Or if it's not broken, don't fix it.
I think that Dirk Cutter, the offensive coordinator, is one of the most underrated coordinators in all of football. And if people aren't aware of how good he's been this year, they could very well see that. And maybe Boise State doesn't go for 35, 38 points or put up, 45 like Oregon did in the Big Ten championship game. But his timing of the run and the play action of when he makes certain calls, it's so good. And it's weird to say, he's an underrated guy as an offensive coordinator when he's been around football for so long. But when you hear, conversation for the Broyles Award, you're not going to hear Dirk Cutter's name out there. If you talk about coordinators that could become head coaches, I don't see his name popping up on any list. The coaching carousel's been going round and round. I didn't see his name out there. So that's why I say he's flying under the radar a little bit, because I think he's really good. The way they use the tight ends, in particular in the play action game, I think has been awesome. I think they do a really good job of always seeming to make those calls at the exact right moments in the game. So, but I want to go back to something you said, because I'm sure Boise State fans are already hopping on you in the comments here, Zach, and you use the bugaboo word, game manager. It has such a negative connotation. I don't really know why. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's,
well, can he take over games?
No,
he can't.
He cannot. But I think when people hear that word, they think, he's limited. Well, that doesn't mean he isn't going to make some good throws. Yeah. Go look at the best plays that he's made this year. Go watch Boise State when they have thrown for some big yardages this year. He's had a couple of games against Georgia Southern. He had 280 yards. He had 307 against San Diego State. And in the other games, he's been under 200 far more often than not. But what you're going to see from this Broncos offense and what could allow them to move the ball with some success to hang around with Penn State in this spot is he will make some throws that you don't think he should be able to make, because he's not that big. He's not that fast. He's not even that experienced relative to some of the quarterbacks in college football. I mean, he's not as experienced as Drew Aller.
He's one of the smarter quarterbacks in all of it. Drew Aller is too. Drew Aller's a smart quarterback in college football. So is Madsen, and that's why you don't see him make a lot of mistakes, because nothing fools him.
Yeah, that is the bet. I think you hit the nail on the head. He is an incredibly high IQ guy who knows how to work within his own physical limitations to go out and execute the offense at a high level. So game managing quarterbacks, I think, has a really negative connotation compared to what the reality actually is. Whereas you would not say that, a ball distributing point guard from, the old school NBA, like Rajon Rondo on that '08 Celtics team that won a championship. He was my favorite guy to play with in 2K because I'd rack up 20 assists with him. He didn't score, he couldn't shoot, but gosh almighty, for what he was needed to do, he's really good at it. And Maddux Madsen has been exceptional this year. He's thrown a whopping 3 interceptions all season long. So he's been really good, and I think that's why Boise State has the ability to hang around in this game. But they're going to have to play very complete. They have to play a B+, A- sort of game, whereas I feel like Penn State could roll out with a C+, B- and still go out and win.
And that's why they've moved from a 10.5 to an 11.5 point favorite, as you see over per our friends at FanDuel. Now, still to come on this show, Ashton Jeanty is the heartbeat of this Boise State team. But if he is somewhat phased out of the game, if he is limited, if he is neutralized, can Boise State even do anything to overcome that? We'll talk about that next.
Before we continue looking at the Fiesta Bowl, a reminder this episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money can help you find subscriptions you forgot about or that you're paying for twice. This might be the best feature because it can be hard to track them all down, but Rocket Money is there for you. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings together everything that you need in one place. I'm not a fan of that in realignment, but I am a fan of it for Rocket Money. Consolidation, that is, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when you use all the app's premium features. What would you do with $740 a year? I'd probably take a weekend with my buddy to Las Vegas and have a great time. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So what if Ashton Jeanty doesn't go off? What if he's held in check? It's not a ridiculous thought. He's a hard guy to tackle. But if he's hit behind the line of scrimmage, on average, he'll probably pick up about 5 more yards after that because he's one of the best in the country in yards after contact, of course. But if you have unlimited penetration by the defensive line, Zach, there's nothing Jeanty is able to do. He has to have some lanes get created in order for him to be at his most effective. But if he's taken away, I think Boise State can move the ball. I just think that's a dangerous proposition with Penn State defensively.
Well, here's a couple of ways that I look at it. So this is the idea that hypothetically Jeanty just has a cold game. Penn State does find a way to take him out of the game plan or limit him to a strong extent. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Boise State getting its line healthy. It wasn't healthy down the stretch of the season. It's actually at its healthiest. That's one. Number two, Penn State does struggle to tackle, not to the extent of Boise State, but Ashton Jeanty, who is a pinball, where guys are going to just bounce off of him, and Penn State is already susceptible to those arm tackles. They might over pursue a lot of times, and I don't think that Penn State is actually going to be able to phase him entirely out of the game. I still think he's going to get probably 150 yards on the ground, if I'm being honest. I still don't think that's enough he would need to have 250 to beat Penn State. So let's just address that. But if Ashton Jeanty is held in check, if Penn State just had perfect game plan by Tom Allen, Ashton Jeanty's not feeling it that day, I look at this roster and there's two things, or there's a few components here. Maddux Madsen, as we've talked about, is a game manager, and he is not going to be able to play hero ball and keep Boise State in it. They need an effective blueprint to continue to go with what they're trying to do with Jeanty. Number two, as part of it, they don't have any other playmakers that are world-class like an Ashton Jeanty. I look at a Louder, the tight end, Camper, the number one leading wide receiver for them. The guys that are going to be covering them, Jalen Reed or Zach Wheatley at the safety spot, or an AJ Harris on the outside as that boundary corner, all those guys are better. Yes, is Louder and Camper going to get a catch here and there? Yes, but when I'm talking about a 50-50 matchup, who's going to win a majority of the time? AJ Harris or any other Penn State defensive backs that are in coverage. And then you flip it over to the defense. Boise State's defense is solid. If they had a bad defense, they would not be in the college football playoff. Group of 5 team, Mountain West Conference team aside, you need to have somewhat of a competent defense. And they do. But if Penn State's able to build a lead, okay, you have to get aggressive. I don't know that Boise State has the playmakers defensively to force these turnovers. Penn State already doesn't turn the football over at a high clip to begin with. So if Boise State's trailing by 2-3 scores, what can they do to get back into it? They can't air it out effectively, and they can't defensively force turnovers in plus territory to erase that kind of lead.
Well, I'll defend the Boise State defense here. They've forced 8 fumbles that their opponents have lost. Overall, 19 times the ball has been put on the ground. But the strength of this Boise State defense is the pass rush. They have been phenomenal this year. They've totaled 51 sacks on the season. 51. And by the way, Maddux Madsen has only been sacked 12 times. I think that's the best answer because you're right. Penn State is not going to just hand you the ball, but neither is Boise State. I think you have...
Yeah, they don't turn the ball over.
No, they really have not. Jeanty's not had a fumble problem. And as we mentioned, Maddux Madsen has only thrown 3 interceptions this year. He is incredibly, incredibly smart. It's probably his best trait as a football player, and it's a pretty darn good one to have when you're playing a position like quarterback. But here's what I'd worry about for Boise State in this game, Zach, if Ashton Jeanty is limited. You have now removed what I feel are the best components of the Boise State passing attack, and that's what they can do off of play action. The way that they set up the movement of linebackers who are creating voids because, hey, number 2 is going to get the ball. Oh, wait, no, it's not. It's play action. Boom, in behind on those dig routes to guys like Cam Camper. Or the way they use their tight ends and sneak them out the backside or use them in the flat. They do a really good job of keeping you on your toes and keeping you guessing. But if the Penn State front 4, led by Abdul Carter, are able to just completely dominate this Broncos offensive line, that's not going to be that's going to be an incredibly huge, large challenge for Boise State to overcome. Because if they have to just sit back, they can throw the football, but in the drop back passing game, I don't have a high level of confidence that Madsen can just go slice and dice, and it's not what they've been. We talked about identity earlier for Boise State in this game. The identity of the team has been running with Jeanty and hit the play action. If you take them out of that, how comfortable are they against probably the second best team that they have played all season? Because it is impressive what Boise State was able to do, going through and winning the Mountain West, not losing a single conference game, beating UNLV twice. UNLV is a good football team. They were a darn good football team this year. They should have beaten Syracuse, who won 10 games in the ACC. They dropped the game-winning interception twice in that matchup. They did beat Kansas, and we know what Kansas was able to become at the end of the year. They knocked off Houston out of the Big 12. Like, when you look at UNLV and beating that team twice, that to me is arguably as impressive as losing to Oregon by 3 points on the road. And you people will probably argue, well, Oregon's probably tough. Okay, that's fine. But that's to me what is impressed about this Boise State team. But even with that, have they faced a defense like Penn State's? Not since Oregon, where they put up 34 points on the road. I just wonder. But they didn't do that with a drop back passing game. Ashton Jeanty had 194, I think, and 3 touchdowns. He was great. He had the big runs. And what I want your thoughts on, Zach, is with the Penn State run defense, have you seen them disciplined enough to stick with it defending a running back like Jeanty? Because what he has been masterful at this year is in the first quarter, if there's a prop out there for Ashton Jeanty rush yards in the first quarter, hammer the under. Hammer the under. All year, it has been Jeanty gets held to 20 yards or so in the first quarter, and you're going, oh boy, they've got him in check. They've got the form. And then, boom, he takes off. He takes off and explodes rips off a couple of big runs, and the offensive line starts to find their footing. So I think that's going to be a really important aspect for Penn State, is they can't just come out in the first quarter and say, we're going to load up, take away Ashton Jeanty, and force him to throw the football. They're not going to do that. No matter how much or how little success they have on the ground in the first quarter, Boise State will keep running it.
And I think that's just kind of the natural attrition of it. Eventually, Ashton Jeanty is going to break through, and Boise State is committed to the run to a point where it might hurt them in this quarterfinal game, because that's just what they do. So even if they are trailing by 14, 17 points, and it's maybe late in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter, they're still going to run, and Ashton Jeanty eventually will get that big play if he hasn't already. I mean, Penn State's probably going to get exhausted at some point. It doesn't matter where, because Oregon definitely dealt with that. Oregon State, UNLV, and Penn State doesn't have as much defensive depth as it would like to. There are key players that are missing, but I think that's where we are in college football. Bottom line is Penn State does need to jump out to an as early of a lead as possible. Talking, if you can make this a 24-7 deficit at halftime, you are in the driver's seat, because then it forces Boise State to have to try something different. If it's a 10-point game, a one-score game, Boise State can kind of continue to do what it likes to do and just kind of hope. But Ashton Jeanty is the domino that affects this entire team, because allowing him to just continue to eat yards, wear down the opposing defense, that does a lot of different things. The play action that you mentioned, it takes the pressure off the quarterback. It allows receivers to get one-on-one coverage. It allows the scheme to get creative. It also does a lot of favors for the defense, because then the defense isn't required to be out on the football field. Boise State's defense, we have not seen them go through and deal with what they do in Boise State's case on offense. So what if Penn State puts together that 10, 12, 15 play drive routinely, kind of like Boise State does, and then the defense is out there on an island? That's when I see this really going wrong for the Broncos, if Penn State can do that.
Yeah, and what I'm interested to see with the Penn State offense is, what's the game plan? What's the game plan? Because when Boise State's gotten pressure this year defensively, they've been good. Hajj Malik Williams will tell you all about that. And on a frigid night in Boise, they were doing absolutely positively nothing. However, when they haven't gotten to the quarterback, this secondary has been burned a lot this year. They've given up a lot of explosive plays. They're allowing almost 250 yards a game through the air. And the only quarterback, they faced John Mateer of Washington State as well. Drew Aller's probably the third best quarterback that they have faced all year, behind Dylan Gabriel and Mateer, as I mentioned. So he's in that sort of class. So can Penn State create the explosive plays? Because they certainly found some against Oregon, but they also ran the ball incredibly well in the Big Ten championship game. And against SMU, didn't seem like it really mattered what they were going to do. It was just going to work out, and the defense was going to win the game. But the question with Andy Kotelnicki and Penn State all offseason, one that I think has been answered in the positive for the Nittany Lions, has been, is he going to be able to create the explosives that just weren't present for Penn State in the last couple of years? And it looked like they have. Are they going to be able to replicate that? Because if you can, now you put Boise behind the chains mentally, where they're saying, boy, now we have to play catch up. Now we're getting into this big shootout here. And I think those are the big plays that are bound to arrive. Jeanty running the ball or Penn State throwing the ball. Those are the most likely ways that you will see teams gain 30 or more yards in this one.
So we've started to outline them a little bit, Spencer. You got into it, how Boise State just needs to be committed to its game plan. Penn State needs to find a way to expose Boise State's secondary, and the pass rush helps them out. If the pass rush is able to get home, then the secondary doesn't have to cover as long for Boise State. My keys for this game, I've already outlined them throughout the week on other shows, but happy to share them again. I think Penn State wins this game. I think Penn State wins it comfortably 38-20. And it's because Penn State is going to do things that Boise State does to other teams. Penn State is going to go up tempo at first, but then they're going to slow it down. And then those 10, 12, 15 play drives, it gives a break for Penn State's defense, but it's something that Boise State's defense isn't routinely used to. And that's just those demoralizing drives that Ashton Jeanty gets to pull off. Now, Penn State is going to do that to a Broncos defense, and I'd like to see how they adjust. What happens if they have multiple quick 3-and-outs, or maybe you get one first down, you don't get that sustainable drive routinely? Then what happens to a Boise State defense that just frankly isn't prepared for that? This is going to be a higher scoring type of game. I would not be surprised if Boise State does score maybe another touchdown in there late in garbage time, but I do see Penn State getting into the high 30s, maybe the low 40s. And for me, it's a two touchdown margin just because Penn State can do so many things offensively. I feel like Boise State is boxed in to an extent.
38 against SMU, 37 against Oregon. Those are the last two outputs for the Penn State offense. And you're giving Andy Kotelnicki a lot of time with Drew Aller and company to prepare for this one. It's a long trip. Boise doesn't have as much travel to deal with there, but maybe that just leads to a sluggish first quarter. But that could also be nullified by the fact that the Broncos haven't played since December 7th, 6th, 7th, whatever day.
Rest versus rust debate.
Yeah, the rest versus rust debate. I don't know that that's actually been settled in the game of football in the college or pro ranks. So I agree that Penn State wins the game, and I also think Penn State covers. Now, the favorites were 4-0 against the spread in the opening weekend of the 12-team playoff. Texas with a goal line stand covered against Clemson. Ohio State, that was easy. Penn State, that was very easy. And Indiana, try though they might have to squeaked out a backdoor cover, were not able to accomplish that against Notre Dame. Eventually, one of these underdogs, I think, covers at the very least, but I don't think that is this one because I like the Penn State defense and the way they played last week against SMU. They had their home crowd behind them. That is certainly going to be a different feeling in this game. But with the stretch of 30-point performances that Penn State has had, I have not seen enough from the Boise State defense, especially with how that Penn State offense played against Oregon, or the offensive line played against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Oregon has got a deeper and more talented front four, and Penn State completely held them in check, ran all over them.
Yeah.
Drew Aller wasn't actually sacked. The one sack Oregon had in the game was Bo Pribula, who is now a former Penn State
quarterback. Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
It hurts. It hurts too much.
It's just the calendar is broken in college football forever and always. But I digress. So I think Penn State wins. I think they cover. I don't think this is a 40, 50-point blowout that makes people, throw their hands up in the air. Oh my gosh, why do we have these teams in the playoff? This isn't fun, competitive, or all this sort of stuff. The NFL, they're the kings of parity, right? That's the whole pitch of the NFL. Anybody can win. They've got all this parity and whatnot. And go look at how many blowouts there were in the NFL over the weekend. There were more than a handful. Should the Steelers just not be in the NFL because the Chiefs beat them on their home field 29-10? Should we just kick them out of the league right here, right now? Or alternatively, is that how football goes sometimes? So I don't think it's a game like that. I do get the sense that Penn State comes out on script offensively, scores a touchdown in their first drive. Boise State, maybe they do the same. I don't have quite as much confidence there because I like the Penn State defense more than the Broncos. So I think Penn State wins. I think Penn State covers. I think it's an entertaining, competitive game, but I think you always have the sense throughout that Penn State is going to win the football game and that Boise State really needs, a big play here, a big play there. And like they had against Oregon, they're going to have to either force turnovers or get a big play on special teams or come up with a trick play or, something like that, a fake punt, an onside kick, or it feels like there's going to have to be a pivot point, a momentum shifter like that. And certainly I know against Oregon, the special teams plays went against Boise State with the 2 return touchdowns that they allowed. But I think Penn State wins. Penn State covers the 11.5, 34-20. And they go on to the semifinal against either Notre Dame or Georgia.
Penn State also, in these episodes, because we could talk about all of this for hours and hours on end, Spencer, but I also want to mention the fact that Penn State just has the quantity of superstars. Abdul Carter's an NFL talent, Tyler Warren, and these guys are either day one picks or day two, and they're guys that are at fringe NFL ready, could probably be a third, fourth, or fifth round pick that may end up returning this season. But guys like Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, there are that's just not replicated to the extent on Boise State. It's Ashton Jeanty and then everybody else. And there's Hassanine at defensive end, right? That's a big reason for the pass rush.
I was going to say, I hope you throw his name in there, because that's a dude. That is it. No, that's the sort of dude that if he were to enter the transfer portal, a bunch of Power 4 schools would say, hey, here's an NIL offer. You want to come play for us over here? We'll take you.
And the guy that Abdul Carter's going against, Cage Casey, the left tackle, that's going to be a matchup. But I look at Denai Dennis Sutton's matchup and I say, okay, this is a favorable one for Penn State. But my point being is that there are more superstars, more star power quantitatively on Penn State side than there is on Boise State side.
Yeah, and the reason that the Broncos are an underdog, or people have asked why are they here, should they be here, it comes down to, do they have the roster talent top to bottom? At the high end, as you mentioned, yeah, Boise State has got some guys that will make plays and can keep around.
They have enough.
They certainly can. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Boise State wins this game. I mean, we saw Penn State get pushed at home this season by Bowling Green, for goodness sake. So I've seen a lot crazier things happen. I just think that Penn State is the more talented team on paper. Doesn't mean it plays out that way on the field, but they're the more talented team on paper, and I think they have all the ingredients to make a pretty beautiful recipe for Nittany Lion fans to make that come to fruition, and you look back and say, yeah, Penn State was just a more talented team. If you think we're crazy, drop your score predictions below. I appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.